First story, A Personal Encounter with the Unknown, 1985. I never thought anything like this could happen to me. I had always heard stories of alien abductions, but I never imagined I'd be living through one. It started out so normal. I was taking a break from the hustle of city life, spending a few days in a secluded cabin upstate. I thought it'd be the perfect getaway, peaceful, quiet, far away from the noise. I remember the night before it happened like it was yesterday. The moon was barely visible, hidden behind clouds that seemed to be hanging too low. It was a weird feeling, like the air was thicker than usual. But I brushed it off as just my imagination, running wild. I wasn't exactly in the best frame of mind, but I didn't think I was in any danger. I had no idea what was about to happen. The night it all started, I woke up suddenly, wide awake but disoriented, like I'd been pulled from a deep sleep. The room was pitch black, too dark even for the kind of isolation I was in. But something felt off, like the air had changed. There was a weight to it now, heavy, oppressive. My body felt stiff, almost paralyzed, like I couldn't move, but at the same time, my mind was racing. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I tried to call out, but no sound left my throat. That's when I noticed them. They were standing at the foot of my bed, figures, dark shapes against the darkness of the room. They weren't human, I could tell that much right away. They had the kind of presence that was unsettling, not just because of their appearance, but because they didn't seem to belong to this world. They were tall, way taller than any person I've ever seen, and their bodies were thin, too thin, like they weren't made for this earth. Their skin was a strange shade of gray, almost translucent, and their faces, I don't know how to describe them, except to say that they were wrong. Their eyes were dark, black holes that seemed to absorb everything, and their faces lacked any real definition, just smooth, flat features, no expression. I could feel them looking at me, but there was no emotion behind it, just cold, calculating presence. They didn't move at first, they just stood there watching me, and I watched them back, paralyzed in fear, knowing deep down that I had no control over this situation. Then one of them stepped closer, and I swear to God, it was like the air around me thickened even more. My skin was crawling, my heart pounding in my chest, and I couldn't breathe. It's hard to describe the sense of time during that moment. Everything felt distorted, like the seconds dragged on, and at the same time they sped up. I could hear my heartbeat thundering in my ears, but the air was so thick that I couldn't even process what was happening. I was in some kind of limbo, caught between sleep and wakefulness, between reality and something else. The figure that stepped closer was the tallest of the group. Its movements were eerily fluid, like it was gliding rather than walking. I remember the feeling of being watched intensifying, and suddenly my body didn't feel like mine anymore. It was like I was a spectator in my own skin, unable to move or even scream. Then, as if some invisible force had taken hold of me, I was no longer in the room. I had no idea how it happened, but one moment I was staring at that thing, and the next I was no longer in my bed. I can't even describe the sensation of how I was moved, only that I was weightless, like I was floating, drifting through space, and I could feel the coldness of whatever surface I was lying on. When I came to, I was no longer in the cabin. I was on a table, or something like it at least. And the room I was in was unlike anything I had ever seen before. The walls weren't walls, at least not in the way we think of them. There were no solid structures, no windows, no doors. The entire space seemed to bend, shift, and pulsate as if the room itself were alive. I remember the dim, greenish light above me, casting everything in an eerie, sickly glow. There was no sound, no hum of electricity, no background noise. Just silence. And them. The same figures, only closer now. I couldn't even scream. I couldn't move. The fear was suffocating, like it had taken over every inch of my being. I don't know how long I was there. Minutes, hours, days. Time didn't exist. All I could focus on were the creatures and the cold instruments they had surrounding me. I could feel their presence all around me, and I knew deep down that they were doing something to me. I could feel them probing my mind, not with words, but with thoughts, fragments of their intentions, their cold curiosity. They weren't speaking, at least not in a way I could understand, but their presence was loud, like a storm inside my brain. And I could feel the terror building up inside me, knowing there was nothing I could do to stop them. The first touch they made, I'll never forget it. It wasn't physical, at least not in the way you would think. I wasn't being touched in the traditional sense, but I felt their presence invade my body, like their fingers were inside me, tapping into parts of my mind, my memories. It wasn't painful, but the invasion itself felt worse than any pain I can imagine. It was as if they were stripping me bare, searching for something. But what? I couldn't tell. It was so personal, so violating. I could feel them digging through my thoughts, through my past, through every secret I'd ever held. I couldn't escape them no matter how hard I tried. I could feel my body responding, my heart racing, but my body wasn't in my control. I was just a prisoner of my own flesh, trapped by something far beyond my understanding. The worst part was how empty they felt, how devoid of empathy they were. There was no emotion behind their actions, no compassion, just an overwhelming sense of indifference. I've never been more alone in my life than I was in that moment. Then, as suddenly as it all began, it stopped. Just like that, the pressure lifted. I don't know what happened to the figures or the space I was in, but I was back in my bed. I woke up gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. It felt so real. Too real. I sat up, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I had just experienced. My room was exactly as I had left it, the stillness of the night hanging heavy in the air. But I knew, without a doubt, that something had happened to me. The feeling that had come with that encounter, the fear, the helplessness, lingered in my chest, and it stayed with me long after the night was over. I tried to shake it off, tried to convince myself that it was just a nightmare, just a bad dream. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me. I had felt them, I had felt their coldness, their presence. I had felt them inside me. And I knew that whatever happened that night, it wasn't over. The days after that night were a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. I couldn't work, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting back to that night, to the alien figures, to the feeling of being completely out of control. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see them, those black hollow eyes, staring at me with that same chilling indifference. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind trying to cope with the trauma, but every time I looked in the mirror, I saw something different in my eyes, something that wasn't there before. It was like they had left a mark on me, something that would never go away. My thoughts became a spiral of confusion. Was it a dream? Was it real? Was I going crazy? I couldn't find the answers. All I knew was that it had felt too real to ignore, and the more I tried to forget, the more it haunted me. It didn't help that I started noticing strange things around my house. Little things. Objects moved when I was sure I had left them in the same place. Lights flickering at odd times, whispers in the dead of night that I couldn't explain. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia, but the truth is, I was scared. I was terrified of what I might have brought back with me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. I did what anyone would do when they're feeling lost and scared. I started researching. I went down the rabbit hole, reading everything I could find on alien abductions, trying to find someone, anyone, who had gone through the same thing. I found a community of people who described experiences almost identical to mine. People who had been taken, who had been violated by these beings, who had felt the same cold, detached presence. There were stories of memories coming back in fragments, of strange symbols appearing on their bodies, of missing time they couldn't explain. I began to piece together my own experience, and the more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just some isolated event. This was happening to others, to people who, like me, were just going about their normal lives until everything was turned upside down. And it wasn't just about the abductions themselves. It was what came after. The nightmares, the feeling of being marked, the unsettling knowledge that they were still out there, still watching, still waiting. And every time I thought I had moved on, it would come back. A flash of memory, a sudden jolt of terror, a cold hand resting on my shoulder when no one was. There, I couldn't escape it. And the worst part, I don't think I ever will. The more time passed, the more I began to question everything I thought I knew. I had always considered myself a rational person, practical, grounded, but nothing about what had happened to me made any sense. I could still feel the weight of it in my chest, a constant pressure that didn't fade. I was afraid to be alone. I was afraid to sleep. Even when I tried to convince myself that I was just losing my mind, the terror never went away. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces again, those empty, dark eyes staring into me as though they could see through everything. I'd start having these vivid, fragmented dreams. In some of them, I was back in that room, unable to move, watching those figures circle around me as they examined me in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. In others, I would wake up in the middle of the night to see shadows standing at the edge of my bed, watching, waiting just as they had done before. But when I would reach out for the light, they'd vanish, as if they had never been there at all. It was like I was going mad, like I was losing grip on what was real and what wasn't. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was just trauma. But every part of me, my gut, my mind, my body, knew that something had happened. Something far beyond my understanding. And I couldn't escape it. I began to take notes, writing everything down, the moments of terror, the strange sensations, the dreams that blurred into reality. The more I documented, the more I realized that I wasn't just remembering what had happened to me. I was experiencing it again. It was like I was reliving the night of the abduction, piece by piece, over and over. Every time I wrote about it, the fear intensified, and the memories became sharper, clearer, more vivid. The details I thought I had forgotten came flooding back. The cold sensation when their fingers touched my mind, The feeling of being lifted off the ground, the cold metallic smell of the place they took me to. It wasn't just a haunting memory. It was like they were still there, like they were inside me, constantly whispering and pulling at my thoughts. At times I'd wake up with my body covered in sweat, my muscles tense as if I had just been through it all again. It was exhausting, mentally, physically, emotionally. I couldn't find peace, couldn't find closure. I didn't know who to turn to. I didn't know how to explain what was happening to me. The people I'd tried to talk to, friends, family, looked at me like I was crazy. They'd brush it off, say it was a nightmare or some kind of sleep paralysis. But I knew what I had felt, what I had experienced, and I wasn't crazy. I couldn't be. I had to find answers. So I started talking to other people who had gone through similar things, trying to find any kind of explanation, some kind of validation that I wasn't alone in this madness. And what I discovered was both terrifying and relieving. This wasn't just happening to me. There were others, just like me, who had lived through the same nightmare. One night, after hours of searching online, I came across a group of people who had been through similar abduction experiences. Their stories were almost identical to mine. Strange lights in the sky, missing time, vivid memories of beings that weren't human. There was a connection, a pattern that couldn't be ignored. Some of them had even gone so far as to get hypnotized to try and recover the missing pieces of their memories. And I decided to do the same. At first, I didn't think it would work. I didn't believe in hypnosis, didn't believe it could bring back anything real. But desperation has a way of making you try anything. So I found a therapist who specialized in regressing people to uncover repressed memories. The session was intense. I was nervous at first, unsure if it was all just a game of the mind. But when the therapist led me under, I felt something shift inside me. The room, the air, everything felt different. My body felt like it was no longer mine. And then, it came flooding back. The room, the creatures, the sensations, the fear, the helplessness, the coldness that filled every inch of my being. It was all there. It was like the floodgates had opened, and everything I had tried to bury, everything I had tried to forget, came rushing to the surface. And then, I remembered something that shook me to my core. In one of those moments, under hypnosis, I saw something new, a face, a being, different from the others standing off to the side. It wasn't like the others. It was watching, waiting. And I realized then that there was more to this, more than I could ever have imagined. After the hypnosis session, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. The face, that figure, the one that stood apart from the others. There was something about it that was different. It wasn't just another alien, another creature. This one felt more intelligent, more aware. It was like it was studying me, not just in the way the others did, but with a purpose. A deliberate, cold calculation. It was standing off to the side during my memories, observing from a distance as though waiting for something. But what? I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a random encounter. That figure, that face was important. It wasn't just another being in the room. It was something more. I tried to push it out of my mind. But the more I thought about it, the more I became convinced that this was something bigger than I had initially realized. That night, I had thought I was just a victim of random alien abduction. But now, it felt like I had been part of something far more sinister, far more organized. Maybe I was a test subject. Maybe I had been chosen. And then the thoughts started to spiral. What if I wasn't the only one? What if this wasn't an isolated event? What if there were others, just like me, who had been marked, who had been selected for something far worse than I could ever imagine? As time went on, the encounters didn't stop. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, and I'd hear those whispers again. Faint, distant at first, but growing louder until I could almost make out the words. It wasn't in any language I recognized. It was a sound, a hum, a frequency that rattled my mind. And then I'd hear the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, just outside my door. I'd get up, my body frozen in fear. But when I opened the door, there was nothing there. No one. Just the emptiness of the hallway. But I knew they were out there. I could feel them. I started to think I was being watched, followed, maybe even monitored. Like they were observing my every move, waiting for something to happen. My life started to feel like a cage, like I was trapped in a loop, constantly being studied, constantly being tested. But by who? By what? The anxiety ate away at me, making every day feel like a battle. I could no longer trust my own mind. I couldn't trust anything. I started locking the doors and windows at night, checking them obsessively, but it never seemed to make a difference. The fear that came with each encounter never truly left me. It wasn't until months later that I finally sought out help from a support group for people who had experienced alien abductions. I had read about them online, and their stories mirrored my own in so many ways. I was nervous at first, unsure if it would be worth it, but something inside me told me I had to try. When I finally showed up, I was shocked to see how many others were there. People from all walks of life, people who had been through the same terror. Some of them were older, others younger, but all of them shared the same look of exhaustion in their eyes. And when they spoke, when they described their own experiences, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. We were all living through the same nightmare. For the first time, I felt a sense of relief, but at the same time, I felt an overwhelming sadness. These people, like me, had their lives shattered by something they couldn't control. Some of them had been abducted more times than they could count, and each time it was the same. The creatures, the cold hands, the examinations. Some had even experienced the same haunting dreams, the same overwhelming terror that wouldn't go away. And the worst part? No one had answers. No one knew why it was happening. No one could explain why they had been chosen. I thought I was looking for closure, for some sort of understanding. But the truth was, I wasn't ready for what I found. I wasn't ready to face the reality of how deep this went. It was bigger than I had ever imagined. And then, it just stopped. It was like a switch had been flipped. One night I went to bed like any other, terrified of what I might wake up to, but when I opened my eyes the next morning, nothing was there. The fear, the whispers, the figures, they were all gone. Just like that, the terror ceased. For weeks, I waited for it to come back, but it never did. I don't know why. I don't know if it was just some twisted part of my mind that finally broke, or if they decided to leave me alone. But no matter how much I wanted to forget, no matter how much I tried to put it behind me, I couldn't. It's been years now, and I still live with the shadow of what happened. There's not a day that goes by that I don't look over my shoulder, that I don't hear that faint whisper in the back of my mind, reminding me that whatever happened to me was real. But I've learned to live with it. Or at least I've learned to survive it. The fear may be gone, but the memories are always there, lurking just below the surface. Waiting. Watching. And I know deep down that I will never truly escape it. Second story, The Road to Nowhere. Allende's Abduction, 1977. It happened on a night that I still can't quite explain. I was driving alone on a long, desolate stretch of road in Mexico, one of those places where the asphalt seems to melt into the night, and the headlights barely cut through the thick, oppressive darkness. The sky was cloudless, but there was an unsettling stillness in the air, the kind of quiet that felt like it was too quiet. No animals, no wind, just the hum of my engine. I had driven this route dozens of times, and I knew the road well, but that night was different. It was like the world had stopped moving. Then, out of nowhere, I saw it, a light. Not the normal kind, like headlights or a distant town's glow, but something much brighter, too intense to be natural. At first I thought it was a plane, but it wasn't moving in the way a plane should. It hovered. It just hung there in the sky, hanging impossibly still. My heart dropped. I knew I wasn't imagining it. This thing was real. I pulled the car over to the side of the road instinctively, even though every part of my body screamed not to. I don't know why I stopped. Curiosity? Fear? It's hard to say. But I just couldn't look away. As I stared at the light, I realized it was getting closer, and not just by a little. It was moving slowly, almost methodically, as if it was aware of me, as if it was coming for me. The fear started to creep in, slow at first, but then it surged through me. My body tensed up, but I couldn't move. My mind screamed for me to drive away, but my hands wouldn't leave the wheel. The closer it got, the more distinct it became. It wasn't just a light anymore. It had shape. A metallic, circular shape. No sound. No sound at all. I was frozen, trapped in that moment. Before I could process what was happening, everything went black. It's like someone had flicked a switch in my brain. The next thing I knew, I was inside something, but not in my car. I was lying flat on a cold, smooth surface. The air smelled sterile, almost metallic, and the room around me was dim, but the light that filled it was an odd shade of blue, flickering in a way that made it feel unnatural. My body felt off. I could move my limbs, but it was like I was underwater. My thoughts were muddled, my senses disoriented. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't. There were figures around me, tall and thin, with faces that were too smooth, too devoid of emotion. They didn't look human, not in the way I understood. Their eyes were large, black and vacant, like they were staring straight through me, not at me. One of them reached toward me. I couldn't see its hands exactly, but I felt it. A cold sensation, almost like a pressure, like they were probing my mind. It was as if they were inside my head, sifting through my thoughts. My heart raced. What were they doing to me? Why was I here? I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. My mouth felt sealed shut. As they circled around me, I could sense that they were communicating, but not in any way I could comprehend. It was like a whispering, but it didn't come from their mouths. The words, if they were words, weren't in any language I had ever heard. Instead, it felt like they were talking directly into my mind. I couldn't make sense of what they were saying, but the emotions that followed were crystal clear. I felt dread, an overwhelming, suffocating dread. There was no comfort, no sympathy. Whatever these beings were, they were detached, clinical, even. The way they moved, the way they acted. It was as if they weren't concerned with me at all. I was just an object to be examined, dissected in the most intimate way. It wasn't just my body that they were probing, it was my thoughts, my memories. I felt them sifting through the darkest corners of my mind, touching parts of me I didn't even know existed. And then, without warning, the pressure in my head intensified, and I felt like I was being pulled apart. Physically, mentally, emotionally. I could barely breathe. The next thing I knew, I was being lifted from the cold surface. My body felt light, almost weightless, and I could see that I was surrounded by a shimmering metallic environment. It didn't make sense. The walls didn't look solid. They seemed to ripple like liquid metal, shifting with every movement. The beings around me didn't speak, but I could feel their attention on me, like they were studying every inch of me. They had no emotion, no expression. But the fear, that's when it hit me hardest. I felt it as a wave crashing through my chest. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was frozen. I could only look on as they continued their work. One of them stepped forward, holding something that glowed faintly in the dim light. It looked like a needle, but not like any needle I'd seen before. It was long, transparent, and pulsing with a strange, unearthly energy. I could feel the air shift around it, and then it came toward me. My chest tightened, and I tried to back away, but my body didn't respond. I couldn't move. The needle, or whatever it was, pierced my skin right above my collarbone. The pain was instant, searing, and unlike anything I had ever felt. It wasn't just physical. It was like the pain was spreading through my entire nervous system, igniting every cell in my body. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, but my body was numb. I couldn't move or speak. I wanted to beg them to stop, but the words wouldn't come. My body was betraying me. The needle felt like it was digging deeper, pulling something from me, something I couldn't even identify. And as it did, I saw flashes of images, memories I didn't recognize. A city in ruins, the sky filled with strange ships, faces I'd never seen before, people who looked like they were reaching for something. I don't know if these were my own memories or theirs, but they were so vivid, so real. I could feel them burrowing into my mind, like they were meant to stay there forever. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. All I could do was watch as these flashes danced behind my closed eyelids. The next thing I remember is being placed back on the cold surface again. But this time, something was different. The pressure inside my head had stopped. The pain from the needle had subsided. But the fear, the gnawing, constant fear, was still there. It was like it had become a part of me, sinking into my bones, seeping into my every thought. I couldn't shake it off, no matter how hard I tried. The beings weren't as close now, but their presence was still overwhelming. I was aware of their eyes, those hollow black eyes, watching me, evaluating me. And then, without warning, I felt something tug at my body. It was like a pull on my chest, a sharp force that yanked me up. I tried to fight it, to resist, but it was as if I was being moved against my will. I didn't know where I was going or why, but I couldn't stop it. I was being dragged along, weightless, like I was being swept through an invisible current. My stomach lurched, and for a moment, everything around me blurred. My thoughts were spinning, and the fear in my chest twisted tighter. I could feel that something was coming, something worse than what I had already experienced. I wasn't sure how, but I knew. The next shift was the most jarring. I was no longer in that cold, metallic space. Instead, I found myself in a room, or at least what appeared to be a room. The walls were darker here, and the air felt heavier. The temperature was colder, like a morgue. I could see my breath, thin wisps in the dim light. I was standing now, though I wasn't sure how I had moved or how long I had been standing there. My mind was still foggy, disoriented, as if I was waking from a dream but couldn't remember how I'd fallen asleep. And then the sound came, a low hum, vibrating through the floor, the walls, like some kind of engine. It was soft but relentless, and it filled my ears, making everything else fade into the background. The figures were around me again, but this time they were even closer. They were inspecting me. I could feel their cold gaze on every inch of my body, and I wanted to pull away, but I couldn't. I was frozen. One of them stepped forward, closer than the others. It was taller, more angular, its movements sharper, more deliberate. It reached out with what looked like long fingers, and I felt the air shift as it touched my forehead. It wasn't like a human touch. There was no warmth, no softness. It was as if its touch was made of ice, penetrating straight into my skull. I tried to resist, tried to push away whatever force was pulling me in, but it was like I had no control over my body. I couldn't move, couldn't even blink. The pressure in my head returned, stronger this time. It wasn't just in my mind anymore. It was in my entire body. I could feel it tightening around my chest, my ribs, my heart. It was as if they were extracting something from me, something they needed. Every inch of me burned, but it wasn't the kind of pain I was used to. It wasn't physical. It was deeper, mental, spiritual. They were taking something from me, something I couldn't identify, and I didn't know how to stop it. The more I tried to break free, the worse it became. The black eyes watched me, silent, unblinking. I couldn't speak, couldn't scream. I was helpless. I don't know how much time passed, but it felt like hours or maybe even days. It was like being caught in an eternity of silence and pressure. I couldn't remember what was happening to me or why it was happening, only that it felt wrong. It felt like they were taking pieces of me I would never get back. I wanted to cry out, but all that came was a strangled gasp. They didn't even flinch. They just kept going. And then, as abruptly as it had started, everything stopped. One moment, I was drowning in the silence, suffocating under the pressure of their cold gaze and their unrelenting examination, and the next, nothing. It was like someone had turned off a switch. The humming stopped, the weight lifted, and the coldness evaporated. I could move again. My body jerked like I was waking up from a nightmare, but nothing about it felt like a dream. I was back in my car, still on the same stretch of road. The night was still as dark and silent as before. I glanced around, half expecting to see them, those beings, still watching me from the shadows. But there was nothing. No light. No figures. Nothing at all. It was as if it had all been erased. The fear still lingered in my chest. A cold, gnawing feeling that wouldn't let go, but the strange sense of disconnection from reality was gone. I checked the time. Only a few minutes had passed since I last looked at the clock, but everything had changed. I had no memory of getting back into my car, no memory of the road stretching before me, and yet somehow I was here, right where I started. I was shaken, terrified. I didn't know what had happened to me, and I still don't. I drove home in a daze, hardly aware of the road beneath me. The hum of the engine was the only thing grounding me in the reality that still felt foreign. Every now and then my thoughts would flash back to what had happened, but every time I tried to focus on it, the details slipped away. The fear never left. It was like I was carrying it with me, a weight on my soul. When I finally made it home, I felt hollow, empty. I wasn't sure what to do with myself. I tried to sleep, but sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyes, black, empty, cold, watching me. It wasn't a nightmare, it was a presence, a knowledge that they were out there, and they had taken something from me, something I couldn't name. My mind felt different, like a part of it had been erased or shifted. I couldn't focus, I couldn't think clearly. And then the dreams started. But they weren't dreams. They were flashes of images, of places I'd never seen, of people I didn't know. Sometimes I would wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, but unable to remember how I had gotten there. Each time I closed my eyes, I felt them watching, waiting. I knew I had to talk to someone about what happened. But who would believe me? Who would understand? I didn't even understand it myself. I went to a therapist, hoping they could explain the constant anxiety, the nightmares, the fear that had lodged itself inside me. It was during one of those sessions that the idea of hypnosis came up. I wasn't sure about it, but at that point, I was desperate. Desperate to understand what had happened, to make sense of the pieces that were slipping through my mind. The first session was nothing like I expected. The hypnotist didn't lead me into some deep trance or anything like I'd seen in movies. Instead, it was like being pulled into a fog, slowly sinking into a place where my mind could open up. That's when it all came flooding back. The images, the pressure, the cold. But there was more. More than I remembered. More than I could have imagined. I was there again, on that ship, in that cold room. I saw their faces clearly now, the way they looked at me, studied me. It wasn't just my body they were examining. They were digging into my mind, pulling out thoughts, memories, and they weren't just looking at me, they were learning from me, learning about us, about humanity. And they weren't done yet. As the memories flooded back during that hypnosis session, I felt the fear rush in once again, like an old familiar friend. It was a visceral feeling, like my body was reliving everything from the moment they first appeared, and the weight of it all hit me harder than I ever expected. There were flashes of things I didn't want to remember, things I couldn't explain. The beings, their cold and sterile nature. It wasn't just an accident. It wasn't a random encounter. I could feel it now. They were studying us, understanding us in ways I couldn't even begin to grasp. And their methods, the needle, the pressure, the way they poked and prodded, this wasn't just about exploration or curiosity. They were gathering information. But why? What were they planning? I didn't know, and I still don't know. The images that came to me during the hypnosis weren't just fragments of the event I'd experienced. They were something else. It felt like they were showing me the future, or maybe a part of the past. A glimpse of something I wasn't meant to see. Cities burning, people running, ships in the sky. But most terrifying of all was the feeling that I wasn't just an observer. I was part of it, somehow connected to it. These weren't just images. They were warnings. I don't know how many sessions I went through after that, but every time I went back under hypnosis, more pieces of the puzzle were revealed. I learned about the beings, their race, their purpose, and their strange, cold intentions. They didn't care about us. They didn't care about our lives or our suffering. To them, we were nothing more than test subjects, objects of study. They had been watching us for a long time, gathering data, analyzing our behavior. But it wasn't just for research. It was something far more calculated, more sinister. I saw them, those same beings, focusing on certain people, certain families, almost as if they were marking us. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as the memories continued to unfold. There were others, other victims, people who had been taken before me, and who would likely be taken again. I wasn't the first, and I certainly wouldn't be the last. This was part of something bigger, something terrifying. I could feel the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, but the truth of it made my stomach twist with dread. They weren't just watching us, they were preparing us for something. I didn't know what, but I knew it was coming. After those hypnosis sessions, I didn't know what to do with myself. The more I learned, the more I wanted to forget. I started avoiding places where I might see something that could remind me of the experience. Dark corners, quiet streets, roads I didn't recognize. My mind was a battlefield, torn between the reality I knew and the strange, terrifying images that kept invading my thoughts. It became harder to tell the difference between what was real and what I had seen in those sessions. I couldn't trust myself anymore. I started seeing things, shadowy figures in the corners of my eyes, objects that would move without explanation. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing those whispers again. Soft, unintelligible murmurs in my ears, like they were still here, still watching. I tried to reach out to the authorities, but every time I spoke about it, I was dismissed, laughed at. No one took me seriously, no one believed me. So I withdrew. I stopped talking about it. I stopped trying to make sense of it. But the truth never left. It was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. I couldn't escape it. I still don't know what happened to me that night. I don't know if it was real or just some strange, terrifying hallucination. But I can tell you this, it changed me. It broke something inside of me that I can't repair. I feel like a part of me is missing, like they took something from me that I'll never get back. I don't know if I'll ever be the same again. Every time I close my eyes, I see them, those black eyes, staring back at me. I hear their whispers in my mind, feel their cold touch on my skin. It's like they never really left. They're still out there watching, waiting. And I don't know how much longer I can go on like this. I don't know what they want or why they picked me. But I do know one thing. I'm not the only one. This is happening to others, to more people than we realize. And maybe, just maybe, it's already too late. I don't know what they have planned, but whatever it is, it's coming. I just hope you'll be ready. If you're enjoying this and want to support the channel in bringing more chilling stories like this, any contribution is greatly appreciated. The donation link is just below this video. It's safe, easy, and fast. No registration required. Even the smallest support means so much. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Third story. The Cold Presence, 1997. It was a regular night, or at least it seemed like it. I was driving home along the stretch of highway near my house in California, the kind of lonely road that feels too quiet for comfort. The streetlights were few, and the stars were nearly hidden by the thick cloud cover above. I remember the engine of my car humming like a soft lullaby, the sound of tires against the asphalt almost hypnotic. I was tired, maybe a little too tired, but not enough to make me feel strange. It wasn't until I saw the light in the sky that everything changed. At first it was just a flicker, like a star falling, but much too bright, much too large. I slowed down, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't a plane, and there were no other vehicles on the road. That's when it moved. At first, just a small shift to the side, but then it came closer, faster than anything I'd ever seen. My heart skipped, and a cold wave of dread crawled down my spine. I couldn't take my eyes off it. It grew larger and larger until the entire car was bathed in this harsh, pulsating light. I could feel my hands tighten on the steering wheel, but my mind was no longer in control. My vision blurred, my thoughts grew distant, and suddenly the car seemed to stop moving on its own. I don't know why or how, but I was paralyzed. The only thing I could do was watch as the light swallowed everything around me. The road, the trees, even the night itself seemed to melt into this white blur. That's when I felt it. An overwhelming wave of dizziness, a sense of vertigo, like I was being pulled from my seat, my body weightless. The last thing I remember was staring at that blinding light, unable to move, unable to scream. I don't know how long I was out, but when I came to, nothing felt right. I wasn't in my car anymore. I wasn't anywhere familiar. My body was suspended. My feet weren't touching anything solid. The air was thick, heavy, almost artificial. It smelled sterile, like something between metal and chemicals. I couldn't see clearly at first. My vision was blurry, like I was waking up from a deep sleep, but the weight in my stomach told me this was different. The panic that hit me as I tried to move was suffocating. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was trapped. As my eyes adjusted, I realized I was in a room. No, not a room, more like a space. There were no walls, but a sense of being surrounded by something invisible yet oppressive. The ceiling, or whatever you call it, was too high to see clearly. It felt like I was inside some kind of ship, but not a ship like anything I could imagine. The edges were rounded, smooth, with surfaces that seemed to shift in the light. The light, though, wasn't coming from anywhere obvious. It seemed to be embedded in the walls themselves, flickering like a pulse, not like a bulb. I couldn't make sense of it, but my instincts told me I wasn't alone. And that's when I saw them. At first, just silhouettes in the dim light. 3 or 4 shapes, standing still. My first thought was that they were human, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized they weren't. They were taller than anyone I'd ever seen. Their skin was gray, almost translucent in places, and they had no real facial features that I could recognize. Their eyes, though, those eyes, huge and black, with an inhuman depth that seemed to look through me, not at me. I could feel my body shaking, but I still couldn't move. One of them, he or it, I don't know, moved closer, and I could see its form more clearly. It was slender, its limbs too long for a human. I could feel the cold emanating from its body, like standing near an open fridge door. My heart raced, but all I could do was stare, terrified, as it leaned closer. Its eyes never left mine. Then it raised a hand, and in that instant I felt an electric shock shoot through my chest. I tried to scream, but again no sound came. It was as if my body couldn't produce a sound, couldn't respond. The worst part was that it didn't feel like I was alone anymore. It felt like they were in my head somehow. Like they were taking something from me, my thoughts, my memories, my sanity. I wanted to fight, but I couldn't. The feeling was overwhelming. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, thumping in panic, but everything around me was silent. Not quiet, not still. Silent, like the world had been muted. Then they started moving around me, each of them doing something, some kind of procedure. I didn't understand it then, but looking back, I think they were examining me. There was no table, no straps to hold me down, but it felt like my body was being manipulated by an invisible force. I couldn't feel my arms or legs. My senses were all over the place, dizzying. They touched me, but I didn't feel their hands. It was as though their presence alone was enough to make me forget who I was. My thoughts kept fading, like I was sinking deeper into something I couldn't escape. Time felt like it was stretching, warping. I couldn't grasp how long I'd been there, or if it had even been time at all. The sense of disorientation was unbearable. One of them, taller, more imposing than the rest, seemed to be watching me closely, as if waiting for something. I couldn't tell if it was communicating with the others or with me, but I swear I felt something inside my head shift. It was like a voice, not one I could hear with my ears, but one that pressed into my thoughts, as if speaking directly into my mind. It wasn't a language I recognized, but the intent was clear. I was being studied. Everything about my body, my mind, my reactions, it was all a part of whatever experiment was happening. My heart hammered in my chest, but the strange thing was, I didn't feel pain, not the kind you'd expect. It was more like a strange numbness, as though the fear itself had rendered me incapable of feeling anything else. I can't explain it, but there was a moment where I knew this wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't just me they had been watching. I could sense that there were others like me, other people who had been taken. I didn't know how I knew this, but I did. And it made my skin crawl. These beings, whoever or whatever they were, had done this before. They had a purpose, a reason for what they were doing, and I was just another part of the plan. The thought made my stomach turn, but the worst part was the realization that I had no control over what was happening. I couldn't fight. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even move. I was at their mercy, and I didn't even know if they knew what mercy was. Suddenly I felt a sharp jolt, and everything changed again. The floor beneath me felt like it was shifting, and for a split second I thought I was falling. I panicked, trying to clutch at something, but nothing was solid. I couldn't see the walls anymore. They were gone. The room, if it was ever a room, faded into a blackness I couldn't comprehend. Then, a cold, mechanical sound pierced the silence, echoing in my ears. The beings around me moved faster now, their movements no longer slow or deliberate. Something was happening. I wasn't sure what, but I was terrified it was about to get much worse. I don't know how long it lasted, but everything after that became a blur. It felt like I was in and out of consciousness, my mind unable to grasp what was real anymore. The memories I had of those creatures, those cold black eyes, somehow they started to fade too. It was like I was losing the ability to remember, as though something was actively erasing them. I would catch flashes, brief moments of clarity where I would see the ship again, the beings, or the strange equipment they used. But each time I tried to focus, it slipped away like sand between my fingers. Then, something unexpected happened. A voice, this time a real one, cut through the haze. It wasn't in my mind. It was coming from outside the ship. You need to wake up. It was clear, authoritative, like a command. But it wasn't one of the beings. It was different. I wanted to respond, but again, I couldn't speak. My mouth wouldn't work. That's when I felt the sharp tug in my chest, the sudden violent sensation that I was being pulled, not by force, but by something more subtle, like an invisible hand gripping my very soul. In that moment, I felt everything pull away from me, my body, my thoughts, everything. I could no longer feel the floor beneath me. I couldn't even feel my own skin. It was as though I was floating or slipping away. For what felt like hours, I was trapped in that void, my mind screaming to wake up, to fight, to do anything. But nothing happened. I was just there, suspended, in time, suspended in space. And then, out of nowhere, everything stopped. The voices, the sensations, the panic. It all just cut off like a switch had been flipped. When I finally opened my eyes again, I wasn't in the ship anymore. I was back in my car. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel, but the car was no longer moving. The headlights were off and everything around me was eerily still. The road that had been there before, the trees, everything was as it had been when I first saw the light. But something was wrong. I could feel it. The weight in the air, the thickness of the silence, it felt off. I didn't know if I had imagined it all or if it had actually happened, but the physical toll was undeniable. I felt dizzy, nauseous, like I had just woken up from a nightmare, but this nightmare, it wasn't over. I looked at the dashboard. The time had passed. Hours had gone by, but it felt like mere seconds had passed in my mind. I didn't know how to make sense of it. How did I get back here? How was I sitting in my car in the exact same spot without having any recollection of how I got there? I checked myself. My clothes were the same, my body felt the same, but something inside me was different. It wasn't until I glanced into the rearview mirror that I truly felt the coldness crawl over me. There was no reflection, just an empty, dark space. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, thinking it was just the shock of everything, but it was still there. Nothing. The mirror was empty. My heart started racing again. Panic crept in and I fumbled with the car keys trying to start the engine. It turned over once, twice, but then nothing. The engine wouldn't start. I looked down at the steering wheel, my hands shaking now, and that's when I saw it. The imprint. It was subtle but unmistakable. A strange, almost burn-like mark on my hand. It wasn't like a bruise or anything that made sense. It looked like a symbol, not just a simple mark. Something I couldn't place. Something unnatural. It was as if my skin itself had been altered, changed somehow by whatever happened. I don't remember driving home. In fact, I don't remember much of the next few hours at all. My mind was foggy, like I was walking through a dream, or maybe a nightmare. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, those beings with their dark, hollow eyes. I could still feel them watching me. It wasn't just in my head, it felt real, as if they were still there, somewhere in the distance, waiting for me to notice them again. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with me. The world didn't feel the same. It felt like I was looking at everything through a distorted lens, a lens that didn't quite focus right. I went to the doctor the next day. I don't know why. I wasn't sure what I expected them to say, but I knew something was off with me. I told him about the dizzy spells, the disorientation, the strange feelings in my body, but he just dismissed it as stress. He told me it was probably just my imagination, that I was overworked. But I knew better. I felt something deep inside me, something I couldn't explain, telling me it was more than just stress. I didn't mention the mark. I didn't think they'd understand. Over the next few days, I tried to get back to normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. There were moments, small moments, when I would be sitting at home and I'd hear a noise like a thump or a scrape. I'd look around and nothing would be there. I started to question my sanity. Was I imagining things? Was I losing my mind? But deep down, I knew the truth. It wasn't just in my head. Something had happened that night, something I couldn't explain, but I knew it was real. The next few weeks were a blur. I tried to go back to work, to act like everything was normal, but there were times when I'd just freeze in the middle of the day, my mind slipping back into that void, that endless space where I was just lost. At night, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling trying to forget, but I couldn't. The fear, the terror, it still clung to me like a shadow, a presence I couldn't escape. I started to see things, flashes of movement out of the corner of my eye. When I'd turn to look, there'd be nothing there. It was maddening. I knew I wasn't imagining it, but it didn't make any sense. How could I have been in a ship with those creatures and then just back in my car? The strangest part, I kept having the same dream, every single night. It wasn't a normal dream. I wasn't in my bed. I was standing in a dark, cold room, no windows, no doors, just a heavy, oppressive air, and there, standing in front of me, were those beings again. They didn't move, didn't speak, but I felt their presence. And they were watching me. It was like they knew me, like they were waiting for something. And then, in the silence, I would hear the same voice I heard in the ship, the one that said, "You need to wake up." But I never could. I always woke up just before the voice finished, just before I could understand what it wanted. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided I needed answers. I went online, looking for anyone who had experienced something like this. I stumbled across a forum, a place for people to share their encounters with UFOs, aliens, whatever you want to call them. As I read through the stories, I felt a cold chill settle in my bones. They were just like me. People who had seen the lights, felt the same paralyzing fear, who had been taken, and some of them had been branded, marked, just like I had been. That was when I knew. This wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't just a bad dream. It was real. The realization hit me like a wave. I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. But that didn't make me feel better. In fact, it made everything worse. Because now I had questions. So many questions that I couldn't stop thinking about. What had they done to me? Why me? Why had I been chosen? And most terrifying of all, What was going to happen next? I decided to take the next step. A woman in one of the forums had mentioned something about regression therapy, hypnosis specifically. Apparently, it was a way to bring back repressed memories, particularly the ones tied to alien abductions. At first, I thought it was ridiculous, but after weeks of being haunted by these flashes of memory, these feelings that I couldn't shake, I was desperate. I needed answers. I booked an appointment with a therapist who specialized in hypnosis and abduction-related cases. When I got there, I was already on edge. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew I had to try. The session started slowly. She asked me to relax, to focus on my breathing, and to let go of everything around me. It didn't take long before I felt a strange sensation, like I was floating. The further I slipped into this trance, the clearer the memories became. The memories of that night, the ship, the beings, the cold, sterile metal of the room. And then everything flooded back. Every single detail, as though my mind had been waiting for this moment. The first thing I remembered vividly was the cold. It was an unnatural kind of cold, like nothing I had ever experienced. The air in the ship felt thick, almost metallic, and it pressed against my skin like a weight. I could see the walls now, smooth, shiny, almost fluid in their design. They weren't solid. They seemed to shift and ripple as if the walls themselves were alive, breathing. And then I saw them. The beings. They were taller than I remembered, with elongated limbs, and their skin had a pale, almost translucent quality to it. Their eyes were so dark that it felt like they had no pupils. Just black voids that seemed to reach into my soul, seeing everything about me. I didn't feel the fear immediately. At first I was too confused, too disoriented. But then one of them reached out to touch my arm. The moment their fingers made contact, I felt it, this strange electrical pulse that shot up my spine. It wasn't painful, but it was unnerving. Like I was connected to something far bigger than myself, something that was beyond my understanding. They didn't speak, but I could hear them. In my head. The voice was cold, distant, and it felt like it came from all directions at once. It said, "Don't be afraid." But those words didn't calm me. They made everything worse. As the regression therapy continued, more memories came flooding back, more flashes of the ship, of the cold, of the beings. But there was something else, something that had been buried deep within me, something that took me completely by surprise. There was a room, a dark room, not like the other sterile parts of the ship, but a room that felt ancient, almost primitive. In that room I saw the device, the machine. I still don't fully understand what it was, but it was like nothing I've ever seen before. It had this twisted, organic quality to it, like it was a living thing. It hummed and pulsed, and the moment I laid eyes on it, I felt a deep, sinking dread. I knew that machine had something to do with me, with whatever they were doing to me. I started to relive the sensations, cold metal under my feet, the sharp sting of whatever they used to examine me, and the way my body refused to obey my commands. I couldn't move, couldn't fight back. The worst part was the helplessness, the absolute lack of control. My body wasn't mine in that moment. They were doing something to me, something invasive. The feeling was so real that I could almost still feel the cold touch of the device on my skin. I had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable. It was as though every inch of me was being studied, analyzed, prodded. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't run. But there was one memory that stood out more than the others. One that hit me like a hammer in the chest when it came back to me during the regression. It was the face of one of the beings. It was closer this time, almost right in front of me. And there was something in its eyes, something that made my blood run cold. There was no kindness, no empathy. It wasn't human, not even close. But in its gaze there was this strange, unsettling awareness. It knew me. I don't know how, but it knew me. And when it looked at me, I felt like it saw everything about me. All my fears, my flaws, my deepest secrets. It didn't say anything. It didn't need to. It just looked at me. That moment, that face, has stayed with me ever since. Even as I sit here writing this, I can still see it in my mind's eye. The darkness of those eyes, the coldness that radiated from them. I don't know what they wanted from me, but I know it wasn't just an experiment. It felt personal, like they were gathering something from me, something that would take a long time for me to understand. The sessions didn't stop there. I kept going back for more hypnosis, hoping to uncover some sort of closure, or at the very least, some understanding of what had happened to me. But every time I went under, I'd relive that feeling of helplessness, that suffocating sense of being completely alone in that alien space. It became a pattern. The darkness, the room with the machine, the creatures. I started to lose track of where the memories ended and where my nightmares began. The line between reality and the regression was blurring. I'd wake up from one of those sessions and feel like I was still there, still on that ship, still being studied. Even when I tried to distract myself during the day, there was a constant hum in my mind, a buzzing that wouldn't stop. It wasn't physical, but it was there. An overwhelming sensation, like the presence of something just out of reach. Something watching me. At night, the dreams became more intense, more vivid. It wasn't just a room anymore. There were landscapes, alien landscapes. There was nothing familiar about them. The sky was a sickly shade of green, and the ground was made up of jagged black rocks that seemed to pulse with an eerie light. I would walk through these landscapes, unable to stop, and the beings were always just behind me, watching. They never spoke, but I could feel them, feel their presence pressing down on me, and always, always, the voice would return. You need to wake up. Every time it was the same. I'd wake up just as I was about to hear the rest of what it was saying. But one night, something changed. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. I had had another one of those dreams, but this time it was different. I wasn't just walking through that alien landscape. I was standing there, staring into the sky, and I saw it. A ship. A massive black ship descending slowly from the clouds. It wasn't like the other ones in my dreams. This one, it felt real. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid. There was no terror. Just this strange, calm acceptance. I knew that ship, and I knew what it meant. The next morning, I sat up in bed, my mind still foggy from the remnants of the dream. But the feeling stayed with me, the calm. I knew I had to do something about it. I couldn't let this continue. I wasn't going to keep running from whatever this was. I had to find answers. I needed to understand why I was chosen. I started digging deeper. I went back to the forums and found more people with similar experiences. And slowly, I began to piece things together. The ships, the beings, the landscapes. It wasn't just happening to me. This wasn't isolated. There were others, and more disturbing than that, there were patterns in the experiences. The same faces, the same ships, the same cold metal rooms, the same devices. I wasn't just a random occurrence. I was part of something much bigger. But what? What did they want from us? I went to the therapist again. This time I didn't need the hypnosis to trigger the memories. They were already there, etched into my mind, persistent. The memories hit me hard, and I could see everything clearly now. The beings were not just studying us, they were preparing us for something. I don't know what it is, but I could feel it, a sense of urgency that I couldn't ignore. The way they'd look at me like they were waiting for something, like they were expecting me to do something. And then, as quickly as the memories came, the sessions ended. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had uncovered. The beings, the ship, the memories, all of it swirled together in my mind, each piece clicking into place, but also creating more questions than answers. I'd had a few moments of clarity during the regressions, but they never lasted. It was like the deeper I dug, the more layers of fear and confusion were exposed. It was almost like I was seeing a version of the truth that wasn't meant to be understood. And the worst part, I knew it wasn't over. Every instinct in my body screamed that it wasn't over, that they would come back, and that time, they would expect something from me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, constantly. I'd look over my shoulder in the middle of the day, convinced someone was standing just behind me. I started to doubt my own sanity. Had this really happened? Was I just a victim of an elaborate hoax, or some kind of strange delusion? But no. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them again. Those beings, those cold, soulless eyes. It was like they were never far away. I stopped going to the therapist. It wasn't that I didn't want to find the answers. It was that I couldn't handle it anymore. Each session was just another layer of fear, another piece of my identity being chipped away. And that damn voice, "You need to wake up," it haunted me. I would hear it in the silence of my room, in the buzz of a crowded coffee shop, even in the sound of my own breathing. It was everywhere. I couldn't outrun it. I stopped sharing what I was going through with anyone, friends, family. How could I explain any of this? How could I even begin to tell them what I had seen? What if they thought I was insane? I had no evidence. Nothing but memories, flashes of a past that felt like it belonged to someone else. But those flashes, those memories, they felt more real than anything else. I knew what I saw. I knew what happened. And the worst part was that I couldn't tell anyone. One night, months later, I was driving down the same road where it all started. I didn't plan on it. I hadn't consciously decided to go back, but somehow my car found its way there. The same stretch of highway where the lights first appeared, where I was taken. The thought of it terrified me, but there I was. My hands were sweating on the wheel, my heart racing. As I approached the area, I slowed down, my eyes darting around. The world felt different now, darker. The air seemed thicker. I passed by the same spot where the light had enveloped my car, but there was nothing there now, just an empty stretch of road. But as I drove past, I felt it, that cold presence, the one I had been running from all this time. It was there, watching me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. And in that moment, I knew one thing for sure. Whatever had happened to me, whatever they had done, it wasn't finished. It was only just beginning. Days went by, and the fear continued to eat at me. I couldn't shake it. Every night, I would lie in bed, my body rigid with tension, waiting for the inevitable. I started to hear things, whispers almost. Low, unintelligible murmurs that I couldn't quite make out. But they were there. It wasn't my imagination, I knew that. They were real. And the more I tried to ignore them, the louder they got. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape them. I was trapped in my own mind, living with the constant knowledge that whatever I had experienced was far from over. That cold, suffocating feeling returned whenever I closed my eyes. Even in the daylight, I couldn't shake the sense that something was lurking just beyond my sight. I knew they were watching me, but for what purpose? Was I part of some larger experiment? Or was it something more sinister? And then the worst thought hit me. What if I wasn't meant to be alone in this? What if they had done this to others, to many others, and I was just one of many? The idea gnawed at me, but I didn't know what to do with it. I tried to get back to some semblance of normalcy, but nothing felt the same. I stopped going out at night, stopped driving down that stretch of road. I avoided looking up at the sky, afraid of what I might see. It was hard to breathe in my own skin, hard to feel at peace when every sensation felt like an intrusion, like they were always there, close, just beyond the threshold of my awareness. I still couldn't explain what had happened, what they had done, or what they wanted from me. But one thing was clear. The memories were real and they were with me for good. I couldn't escape them. Every flash of the ship, the beings, the room, it was all too much. And still, in the back of my mind, the voice persisted. Wake up. What did it want me to wake up to, and why didn't I feel like I had ever really woken up? It's been years since that night. I haven't seen the ship again, but I still feel it. Every now and then, I'll be driving home, and I'll catch a glimpse of something in the sky. A light that seems too bright, too still, hovering just outside my field of vision. It doesn't last long, but I know it's there. I haven't told anyone about this in a long time. I don't think anyone would believe me. I don't even believe it myself sometimes. But I can't escape it. I can't forget. The memories keep coming back in waves, when I least expect it, when I'm alone in my room, when I'm sitting in a crowded cafe. They've never left me, and I don't think they ever will. I still don't know what happened that night or why it happened to me, but one thing is certain. There's something out there. Something that knows my name. Something that sees me. And maybe the worst part is that I know they're waiting. For what exactly, I don't know. But I can feel them, watching, waiting, and I don't know if I'll ever truly be free of them. So, what did you think of this story? Did it scare you? Was there a part that gave you chills or stuck with you the most? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. If you've had a similar experience or have suggestions for improving future videos, let me know too. Thank you for watching and being part of this amazing community. See you in the next story.